blessing to me. Now I want to turn to the scripture here this morning. Turn your attention to 1 Corinthians. Newly named book of the Bible, 13th chapter and 13th verse. 1 Corinthians 13:13 in the New International Version, and there you will discover these words. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. You may be seated. I want to talk today about the greatest of all time. The greatest of all time. When I was a child, Westerns were at their peak. The end of the golden age of Westerns. The Western was a particular and peculiar genre of films because it captured the American spirit in all of its unique and powerful expression. The Western was an expression of the ideals of America along the frontier, what it meant to be an exploratory, experimental culture. And the modern West was the manifestation of everything that America imagined about itself. The gunslinger, the solo criminal against the gunslinger, and the gunslinger as the embodiment of the ideal norm of justice being brought to bear upon an unjust wilderness and frontier. The sheriff in the town appointed to keep the justice, a villain who was seeking to undermine the traditions of justice, and then the townspeople who could be swayed either way, intimidated by a marauding force or inspired by a singular figure. In many ways, the modern Western was a projection of the ideal of America that was a fantasy. Because the same time period that the Western covers neglects to mention that much of the labor was being done by enslaved Africans who were being brought to bear upon the American South, and then by expansion of their labor, other parts of the country. And even though there was liberation and emancipation, many of the films that celebrate the Confederacy portray those men as heroes of the American South because their heritage was being defended. And at the same time, we understood that there was another war being prosecuted, an invisible struggle against America's self-definition, which was rooted in empire and fantasy. And the collusion of empire and fantasy meant that America was lying to itself about its own identity. We used to watch those films much like we watch Tarzan. Me Tarzan, you Jane. In an African jungle, a white man taming the wild beasts and the supposed savages that constituted and populated that jungle, so that he and a chimpanzee were able to rule over the vicious and savage components of that jungle, the constituents of that jungle, African men and women who were severely underdeveloped and incapable of mastering an intellectual approach that was able to trump Tarzan, even though Tarzan's language was severely underdeveloped. This to America was great. Edgar Rice Burroughs' fantasy projected in the form of Tarzan swinging through the jungle, mastering the African savage, because after all, whiteness and empire in the West would tame the unruly presence of the darker races. And so the Western and the jungle fantasy colluded to produce an image of America that was really unrealistic. And one of the great films that came out of the Western tradition, though it was a subversion of that tradition, was part of what was known as a spaghetti Western. Now, it was spaghetti because it was made in Italy on a low budget, but it began to have a tremendous effect around the world. Clint Eastwood, a man who was complicated, to say the least. Undeniable film genius. As a maker of films, the man is nearly unparalleled. His politics, questionable when it comes to those of us in communities of color, but his talent undeniable. And one of the great spaghetti westerns, and I guess if black people had been responsible, they would call them collared westerns. Maybe chitlin westerns, chicken westerns, fried chicken in particular. One of the great expressions of the genre of spaghetti westerns was the good, the bad, and the ugly. Y'all remember that film? Clint Eastwood, the man who spoke very few words, smoking his cigar, with his poncho on and his hat, Goldilocks, as Tuco called him. He was the good. The bad was a man of even fewer words who was in pursuit of his goal and would kill anybody in the way. The ugly was the clown prince of the three. He was lascivious in his desire. He wanted to get the treasure. All of them were looking for the treasure that was given and passed on by a man who was killed named Bill, who was trying to keep that treasure, but it was buried and only he knew the secret. So the good, the bad, and the ugly were in pursuit of it. And so being in pursuit of that treasure meant that the good, the bad, and the ugly were different levels of pursuit that were being expressed within a Western that was telling the lie to America about its own identity and a fantasy of empire colluding with the representation on the screen about who America is. The reason I begin there is because we talk about our ideas about what's great. Spaghetti Westerns, great among the genre of films. And these three characteristics that we see articulated for us today found a kind of resonance in the good, the bad, and the ugly, and found a resonance when we have these big arguments about who's the greatest. Recently, LeBron James has entered the conversation. A guy out of Chicago was considered to be great. Michael Jeffrey Jordan. And then a guy out of Los Angeles, originally from Philadelphia, Kobe Bean Bryant. And then you've got others, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Oscar Robertson. But LeBron James has entered the conversation of late because LeBron put on a display in the last postseason that was one for the ages. And so the argument rages about who's the greatest of all time. Muhammad Ali claimed to be the greatest of all time in a world where Sonny Liston had been the baddest man on earth, in a world where Joe Louis had not only fought for his own athletic excellence, but for his people in a world that refused to acknowledge the humanity of black people and fought for a nation against fascism that refused to acknowledge his humanity, and yet through his fisticuffs he bested Max Schmeling and therefore struck a blow against Nazism and fascism at the same time in American society against those forces in the world. Isn't it interesting that Max Schmeling, the man he bested in the ring, went on to become a vice president for Coca-Cola and become a multimillionaire, and the man who worked on behalf of American democracy was greeting people in Caesar's casino in Vegas, dying a pauper, so poor that Frank Sinatra had to pay for his funeral. And so we argue about who's the greatest. We argue about great preachers. You got three of the greatest coming this week to your pulpit. Sister Gill, Reverend Gill, Dr. Gill, Dr. Marcus Cosby, Dr. Lance Watson, and you got a genius in residence. If none of them never show up, you got all of that in one man. But people have arguments all the time about who's the greatest of all time. And what's interesting is not only who's on the list, but who ain't. And when you come to this lineup that the Bible gives us this morning, now these three remain. They done made the cut. Imagine who else was in competition. What's interesting is not that faith, hope, and love are there. Notice what wasn't mentioned. Power wasn't mentioned as being the great feature that we should pursue. Jesus didn't, it did not say that these three remain: power, faith, hope. It did not say power. And yet power is seen as something that's vital and necessary, but the author of this scripture does not believe that power deserves to belong or be named in the greatest of all time. The greatest virtues that we can possess, and the world thinks that you got to have power. Be ruthless in the exercise of your ability to dominate another. Be fashionable in the desire to rule over somebody else. The Bible does not give power a place of prominence. Why is that? Because men and women have abused power. They have used it to uplift and to drive down. They have used it to celebrate the good virtues of life, but they've also used it to echo evil. Those Westerns that I talked about are really the attempt to market American identity as the most fascinating and desirable in the world, and we know that ain't even the case. The Western that was rooted in the Confederacy denies the fact that America exercised power against millions of people who became enslaved in American society, extracting them from their rest in African origins and bringing them across the waters. And can you imagine in that day, in those days, in those 2.5 centuries of the Western slave trade, that more than 100 million enslaved people, or people they wanted to enslave, lost their lives? 100 million Africans in the Middle Passage lost their lives. Have you ever thought about that? That these many souls, many more than came here, lost their lives, jumped overboard, committed suicide, refused to have their children born into this world, and had abortions rather than see their children subservient to white men and women. And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my God and be free. Toni Morrison's Beloved is built upon a historical narrative where a black woman, rather than having her children be in chains for the rest of their lives, sought to deny them a life of drudgery rather than have them live in a universe that denied their humanity. Now, you know what's interesting to me is that when we have all these philosophical conversations about abortion and about denying people the right to life and how life begins at conception, they lying. They ain't got no love for kids for real. They ain't got love for children who ain't theirs. They'll send them to the border to be separated from their mothers and fathers, and damn you if you talk about abortion. They will undercut their legitimacy as children of God in order to serve their evangelical piety. Robert Jeffers don't give a damn about children who are unborn, who are then born black and brown and red and yellow in this society. They do not care. And so those who would argue against the humanity of black people, who would dare abort their babies, what would you do? White brothers and sisters act more crazy over less vicious circumstances. Do you know most mass murderers are white? Tell them why you're mad, son. Out of control, feeling a decline of authority in their life, feeling somehow that they can't get a date on Saturday night. Do you know Jordan Peterson has made an argument, a psychologist out of Canada, to suggest that these incels, these enforced celibates, are going around engaging in violence because women won't speak to them? Get game. Learn how to talk to a woman. Black men ain't got no money, got mad game for years. We don't own no banks. We ain't running no industries, but the gift of gab, the articulate ability to rhetorically assess the vulnerability and viability of a female walking opposite of us, and to engage in a colorful poetic expression of appreciation for what you got. Learn some game, homeboy. Don't kill nobody, kill the game. And so power ain't on that list. Neither is beauty. You would have thought that of all the great characteristics that should be spoken about, that beauty would be one, but that fades. Your physical looks, whether you're a man or a woman, your handsomeness and your beauty, that really ain't gonna last. And if it does, it can't supply nothing by itself. As Kanye said, sometimes the beautifulest people do the ugliest things. And so your physical pulchritude, your physical appearance, your physical appeal will not be the ultimate measure or determinant of how good a life you live. You got to have something deeper than how your hair look, how your nails is, what your suit looks like, how many clothes you got in your car, in your bar, in your place of business or residence. You got to have something deeper than that. Beauty can't pay the bills. And if it do, that might not be a job you want. Sex wasn't on that list, to my surprise. Now, let's be real. Sex is a powerful thing. If your children are asking now, I'm going to let them go home and ask you what that means. Sex is a powerful force. And yet the word doesn't say that this will be of the greatest things that could happen to us, and it is. But it didn't make the final cut. So you see, even the things that don't make the final cut, it ain't that they great, they ain't as great as. What are we talking about? Because sex is great as long as it lasts. The minute or two that you engage in ecstasy, I swear to you, I love the Matrix because the blue pill was made for me. I'm talking about in terms of mysteries of God. I have no idea what you people are speaking of. But sex ain't on that list. Because ultimately, an orgiastic relationship to your body or another will never satisfy your soul. And you see these beautiful women with these men, you go, how you get her? I got more money than him. I got more bank than him. I'm taller than he is. I'm better looking. I can do ecstatic things that will turn into monstrous algorithms of acrobatic engagement. Kids are here. I'm trying to talk about it. I can do X, Y, and Z, but what you can't do is at night when the ecstasy is over, feel the soul of another person that takes intimacy. And intimacy is about a spiritual connection to another person. Wealth wasn't on that list. Not that we don't need money. But is it a cliche by now? Have you seen all these rich people who kill themselves? I ain't saying having money is bad, because I've been poor. That's overrated. I remember I was on welfare because I got fired from my job for no good reason at Chrysler. And my then-to-be wife, I think I'd married her by then. I ain't saying there was no shotgun wedding, but a revolver was in the room. We lie to each other, don't we? This is how it was. I got fired from my job. She was pregnant and couldn't work. So neither one of us had any income. The baby was born, and many days we had nothing to eat. And then when we were on welfare, women, infants, and children, WIC, I stood in that line. And then when I went to the welfare office, they embarrassed me, talking loud. What's your name? Michael, do you have a job? No. Have you been looking for a job? Yes. And then went on, right, to ask me personal questions about my effort, my ability, what I was doing, just to give me a few dollars to help out with my wife and child. I will never forget that shame and embarrassment of what it meant to be degraded. I wasn't lazy. I'm a hard-working black man. But I could not find a job to save my life or the life of my child or my wife. And for many days, we did not eat. And so I, Ben Poe, got evicted from our apartment on Christmas Day. Now that's cold. Could have done it Christmas Eve. Better yet, the day after Christmas. What do the lonely do for Christmas? Y'all don't know nothing about the emotions, do y'all? Y'all have no idea about that, do you? On Christmas Day, I had a copy of Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon in my hand. Milkman Dead was the character's name, and eventually they were flying in Song of Solomon. And I grasped hold of that book, and I believed that one day I too could fly above my circumstances. In the meantime, they put us out, and we got an apartment with a man who pulled a gun on me because we had to share an upstairs flat with another man. Holes in the wall, squirrels coming in, and the man pulled a gun because he said I was in the bathroom too long. That part was true because I went in there to read. I was on my throne reading Kierkegaard and Heidegger for a poor black boy who had not gone to college until he was 21. He pulled the gun on me and asked me to get out, and I obliged him. So I ain't romanticizing poverty, but what I discovered is there were some lessons I learned along that way. How to treat people. When I go to a hotel, I leave $20 for the woman or man cleaning up because I know that's a job they need and somebody needs to help them out. When I see somebody begging for money, yeah, they might go use it on drugs, but for one night, can we spare them the infamy of their degraded status? I learned something there. And I see rich people now don't care about nobody. Become president and dogging people. Look at all these billionaires in office now. Look at Pruitt, who just got put out. Look at Mnuchin. Look at Carson. Look at DeVos. Look at the president. With the exception of the black man, all of them really rich. He was smart in his ability to divide those twins, but he hasn't divided himself from the madness going on in the White House. All those rich people, and look what they're doing, wrecking our country, denying opportunity and calling Mexicans out of their names and Muslims out of their name and beating up on people who are vulnerable and dogging women. This is what we have inherited. Wealth alone cannot save you. It can't make you no more smarter than you ain't. We got a man up in there who has 25 words in his vocabulary. He don't know nothing. He mad that the man who had the job before him got more intelligence. That man wealthy now, but he wasn't wealthy back then. He was a poor Negro from Hawaii. But he had something more than wealth. He had a wealth of knowledge. And so the rich white man got mad because the poor Negro was beating him up. Didn't know nothing. He got 25 words. See Dick run. There is Jane. Let me grab it, grab it, grab it. Oh, but wealth ain't on there, and neither is knowledge. Knowledge ain't on there either. Oh, that's my industry. That's what I do. Knowledge. I ain't dogging knowledge. Knowledge is important to have. Wish people in Washington had more of it. Wish they were interested in it. Wish we had more knowledge of who we are so we can understand how great we are. If you knew more about Negroes, you'd be even more impressed. If you knew who black people really were, you could puff your chest out. Boy, we were smelting iron ore when people were playing in their backyards in Western civilization. We were building kingdoms, erecting monuments through pyramids to the infinite mystery of time and God. If we knew more about ourselves, we wouldn't try to be like white folk. Envy not the ways of thy oppressor. Don't envy your oppressor, because you got something better and deeper than that. But what did make the cut was faith, hope, and love. What'd that tell you? God's priorities ain't yours. What is great may not be the greatest. God done whittled this list down to three things: faith, hope, and love. And do you know God got the nerve to suspend all suspense and tell you which one is the greatest? Because some people think faith is sorry, not right. Oh, it's great. The confidence and trust in a supernatural power that allows you to navigate your life. It's a beautiful thing, but some people have made a fetish out of it. Some people worship instead of God. Some people got faith in faith instead of God. Some people believe in a book instead of God. Faith, hope, and love. Faith, the ability to imagine a structural relationship between you and the divinity that inspired your existence. Faith, the ability to codify and make an institution of belief systems. But those belief systems are not as great as love. Why is that? Because God would never trust what men make to define what God does. Because the reason faith can't be the greatest because you got borders on your faith. You trying to make people show ethical passports and spiritual visas. God knows you ain't a good representative. I ain't a good representative. Faith cannot be the ultimate good because your faith cannot be the only determinant of what is great in this life. Why? Because some of y'all got weird rules to your religion. You go around telling people, as they did in the early part of the 20th century, look, if God meant for you to see, you don't need no glasses. God would have made you able to see. Do you know that's what they told people? Because scientific advance was seen as antithetical to spiritual development. See, some of us would have crazy rules, like if you gay, you can't be blessed by God. And can you imagine the arrogance it takes to assign worth and value to another human being based upon your rules, and you ain't been to heaven? Nigga, you trying to get there. You ain't been there. You trying to imagine yourself there. You ain't got no permanent residence in a place you heading to. What's your address? You down here with me. You describing the cubits and the metrics and the measure of heaven as if it was a place, as if it wasn't about the Spirit of God, as if it wasn't a measure of your ability to treat people with decency and respect. So God can't make faith the highest because all these religious wars would be panning out just the way they are. You got Muslims who don't like Jews and Jews who don't like Catholics and Catholics who don't like Protestants and Protestants who don't like the rest of us. So the thing is, how God gonna deal with that? How that gonna be the highest? Because whoever's religion wins out, who seduces more people, who hurts more people, and please don't ascribe this to Islam. Remember the middle centuries, the auto da fe, the Crusades? Don't nobody kill folk like Christians. Do you know when they burned crosses on lawns, they were doing it in Jesus' name? They killing you in the name of Christ. Don't look at Ali Baba. Don't look at Muhammad. Look at Billy Bob. Jethro. God cannot trust ultimately the Spirit of God to any religious institution. I have meat that you know not of. I got other sheep that you don't know nothing about. I got to protect them from you because in my name you'll kill them. In the name of God, we will snuff out God's creation. In the name of God, we will smuggle in evil. In the name of God, we will kill God. Do you know those people who killed Jesus? And I ain't talking about Jews. I'm talking about empire. Did so in the name of their both religious entities that were beyond Judaism. I'm talking about now even the pan-religious identities that were being generated, and beyond that, the political ones which were much more determinate. He was killed under Roman authority. And when you look at that Roman authority that killed him, the government will kill you, snuff you out, thinking it's a religious institution, or even against the religious institution, that it will be used to expose the crevices and cracks in your religion. Now these people in America trying to say this is a Christian nation. This ain't no Christian nation. Thomas Jefferson don't believe what you believe. Benjamin Franklin wasn't even a believer. He just didn't care, as long as you didn't mess him up. Thomas Jefferson said, take all the miracles out. Let's just start right there. They wasn't no Christian like you are Christian. God cannot trust faith with the ultimate exercise of truth, because people will always be inspired by and motivated by their desire to control God under their theology. God ain't no victim of your theology. God is not subservient to your belief system. You sitting up here acting like you know the be all and end all. This is a mystery. Don't none of us know what's happening. We believe in our hearts. We make a statement about what we hope to be the case, but you ain't been there. You've not stood next to God, God's self. So in the meantime, get a little humility involved. But hope wasn't the ultimate either. And you think hope would have been number one. You would hope that hope would be number one. But the reason hope can't be number one is because your expectation, which is what hope is, and the fulfillment of your expectation is colored by your culture. See, what you hoping for and what God wants might be at odds. You know? And so what's interesting here is that when I say it's colored by your culture, when I talk about my white brothers and sisters, their hope to remove Negroes from their communities was an interesting aspiration. Now we know it is gentrification, right? Come into our neighborhoods, move us out the way, because they hope they can get access to resources and territory that are occupied by people who don't have the economic or financial resources to sustain them. So they come into our neighborhoods hoping for a break and to rechart the demography and geography of the land they inherit, but at the same time they hoping for something that's been generated by their culture. Their whiteness has informed the level of their hope. Let me make it more plain. So when white folk have aspirations about what they hope the world to look like, it often don't include us. Have you ever noticed many of the films generated by white filmmakers about the future ain't got many Negroes? That's why we love Black Panther. Wakanda forever. And ain't that sad? We got to get a fictional African nation to express our aspiration, because what white folk hope for is our extinction and extermination. Now, I know that sounds harsh. I don't mean individual white people you meet. I don't mean I'm talking about collective whiteness. The point of whiteness is to contain, control, and ultimately destroy red, yellow, brown, and black identities. Whiteness, James Baldwin reminds us, is a political projection and a fiction. Ain't nothing you born with. You ain't born white. It ain't in your genes. Ain't nobody born a race. That's society ascribing meaning to your color. Ain't no such thing, the anthropologists tell us, as a race. White folk made it up. Do your history. Whiteness is the product of a fiction of empire projected onto genes and chromosomes to determine the inherent superiority of a certain group of people. We know race ain't real. And yet, what's interesting is white folk keep investing in that, and then when it comes to justice for us, they get mad if we identify ourselves as a race. You done dogged us for 300 years as a group, but now when we say we part of a group, you mad at us. You should do it on individual merit, based upon your qualification, and not being part of a group. Well, let me tell you something, Mr. White Man. For 350 to 425 years, you saw fit to subordinate me to your asinine aspiration to determine the legitimate scope of my humanity. Now that I am understanding myself as part of a group, get out of the way. Because I, as a black person, understand the power that is derived from my understanding of blackness as a collective force. You might stop one Negro, but you can't stop Negroes. You might stop one black person, but you can't stop black people. We are here. We are announced. We are arrived. We ain't going nowhere. I'm almost done, but the greatest of all time is love. I love this. You know why? Because love is irregardless. Now, I can tell y'all speak Ebonics because y'all didn't even think that was a problem. And that's what I love about Negroes. See, it's regardless. But Negroes want to get extra protective and special. Make sure you understand it's irregardless. Love is beyond your denomination, beyond your faith, beyond your hope, because love shatters all boundaries. It constitutes a universe of meaning and affection. And those who come to God believing God is must understand that God is love. It didn't say God was hope. It didn't say God was faith. What does it say? God is love. Oh, that's liberating, because that means you can't lock nobody out of God's kingdom. You ain't got the right. You can't stop me. God will claim me. You don't know what God gonna do with nobody else. You can't determine that. You could be born an immigrant 2,000 years ago, and the government trying to kill your kids. So you take them to run into Egypt like the angel told you. Your pastor has brilliantly deconstructed this. And so his name might be Jesus, but it don't make no difference. It could be Jesus. It could be Raphael. It could be Michael. It could be any of us, because we know that Herod is always trying to destroy black children with promise, brown children with promise, young children with promise. Love means that even the things that you think are sacred mean nothing to a God who believes everybody is sacred. Love is the greatest of all time because nobody has a copyright on that. Nobody can determine what it is. And love will shatter all boundaries and borders and distinctions and differences and gradations. That faith didn't put Jesus on a cross. Right there he said, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? If it was faith that was the greatest, Jesus would have been sent. But that didn't happen. Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane told you why hope couldn't win. If it's all right with you, I would hope that this cup could pass from me. But that didn't work. Even the Negro version of hope ain't working. I wish a Negro would. That's black hope. I wish a Negro would tell me what I cannot do. But love rises above everything else. Above your pigment, above your stature, above your church, above your theology, above your faith, and above your hope. God is love. And if you believe in God, believe in love. Love the hell out of this world. Love the hate out of this world. Love the evil out of this world. And then God will appear again.